Energy made this one.
Yeah. Beats in life.
That's right.
From the very beginning, the first sound is the beat of the heart. The sound of life is only right. Let the beat is the start. We embark on a life of making memories of sounds. In our mind, what we find, we can make it with sound. We experience, experiment until it's a passion. You find your sound eventually. Just master what you practice. The passion becomes more when you develop your repertoire. There's purpose in the making of these beats. What we do it for.
Welcome back. Another episode of Beats in Life. Got a real special one here, man, for y'all. It's one of my favorite foundational producers. Not only was Rick Rubin one of the first super producers in hip hop, you know, with a super group, Run DMC, he also co-founded the legendary, still powerful Def Jam Records, one of the first big hip hop labels to emerge in the early to mid 80s. Rick Rubin, he is credited as merging hip hop and rock and roll at a time where rock and roll was the primary biggest genre in the world. And without this early production and bridge between hip hop and rock and roll, there's no telling where hip hop would be right now. So Rick Rubin, not only was he a great mind as far as a producer and his ability to bridge those two worlds, but he also helped co-found one of the biggest, most pivotal and impactful rap labels at that time, hip hop rap labels at that time. And without Rick Rubin, who knows where the whole genre of hip hop would be right now. He is so important to the whole culture of hip hop as far as music goes. So I wanted to share a little bit about Rick Rubin's early beginnings and going to his records that he is most known for producing. And this is, primarily this is motivation for all of you hip hop producers or producers of any genre, because Rick Rubin's catalog goes from hip hop all the way to, I know he did country and rock and roll. So Rick Rubin's contribution to hip hop spans more than hip hop, with the minimalist approach, which is a very distinct way of producing. And I think one of his most famous quotes is, he don't know anything about music. So that's his thing. He's really into the actual vibe and energy of the artist that he's working with. And that's what he's primarily known for. So yeah, I wanted to share a little bit about Rick Rubin. Check it out.
Frederick J. Rubin was born on March 10, 1963, to Michael and Linda Rubin. His father sold shoes and his mother was a housewife. Rick grew up in Long Island, New York, in a household where music was always playing.
The Beatles was the first thing when I was probably 5 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. The Beatles and the Monkees were sort of the thing. And then I probably stopped listening to music by the time I was 7 or 8. I got into magic and I started learning about magic and being a magician.
Rick would take the train from Lido Beach into Manhattan and hang out in magic shops. He said, quote, "When I was 14, I had magician friends who were 60. I learned a lot from them. I still think about magic all the time. I always think about how things work, the mechanics of a situation. That's the nature of being a magician," end quote. When he was 14, he went to see a pediatrician because his neck was hurting him. The doctor told him it was stress and that he needed to learn to meditate. Thanks to this encounter, Rick has been practicing transcendental meditation since he was very young. Early in high school, Rick got into hard rock groups like AC/DC and Aerosmith, and then gravitated to the intense and angry sounds coming out of the punk rock genre. Soon he was playing guitar in his own punk band called The Pricks. At school, Rick said he felt like a loner, like he didn't fit in, like he wasn't a part of anything. That was until he noticed the black students at his school listening to a new and energetic type of music called rap. His high school was about 70% white and 30% black. The white kids were into Led Zeppelin, Yes, and Pink Floyd, which were groups that were all completely over, whereas the black kids were always waiting for the latest rap or scratch record to come out. He found it fascinating that people could be so musically progressive that they'd want the newest thing, love it, and forget everything that came before it. Rap was like the hardcore punk movement, except the black teenagers actually accepted new music, and Rick did too. Although he'd play in another punk band called Hose, Rick was becoming increasingly enamored by rap music.
It wasn't shiny, it wasn't polished, it was raw and felt more poetic and personal. No one got into hip hop at that time thinking it was going to be their road to success.
Y'all hear that? Early hip hop was not a road to success. No one did hip hop thinking that they were going to change their lives. It was something felt. It was something, just a vehicle of expression. And that's what it still is to, most people from my generation. Most people from the early golden era of hip hop. We do this out of love, we love it. So it's not, if money come, cool, but that's not the motivation. The motivation is a need to share a story, a need to share a feeling, a need to, as an artist especially, and the producers too, and everybody involved in the creative process. So early hip hop, it wasn't lucrative. It wasn't a lot of money. No one knew that hip hop was going to be $1 billion business one day. No one knew this in the early days of hip hop.
Rick was encouraged by his parents to be a lawyer and enrolled at New York University in 1981 as a philosophy major with the intention of going to law school. Choosing NYU proved to be one of the most important decisions of Rick's life because it placed him exactly where hip-hop was happening. Every night, he'd go to local hip-hop clubs where he was the only white person in attendance.
I didn't take any classes before 3 in the afternoon because I knew I wouldn't wake up. I would go to these clubs like Negril and the Roxy and see what was going on there. And the records that were coming out didn't reflect hip hop. Hip hop was a whole interactive culture, and the DJ, the reason in the Def Jam logo the DJ is big is because the DJ was a key piece of the hip hop world. Yes. But the records at the time didn't reflect that. So really the goal of making records was more almost like a documentarian of like, I'd go to these clubs, I'd hear this incredible music, then I would buy the records and they wouldn't be anything like it. And just from the fan point of view of wanting records that sounded like what I heard at the club, I started making them.
One of Rick's first friends in the hip-hop scene was DJ Jazzy J, who spun at the hottest clubs and would give Rubin advice on which records to buy. In 1983, the pair decided to make their own record with Jay's brother, T. LaRock, called It's Yours.
It's yours!
This track took off in New York's hip-hop clubs and rap radio stations during the spring of 1984 and led to Russell Simmons reaching out to meet Rick. Russell was already notable on the scene for being the manager of popular acts like Run DMC and Curtis Blow. When the two first met, they vibed right away because they both liked all the same records. Rick told Russell that he wanted to start an independent record company and wanted him to be his partner. But Simmons was hesitant because he wanted to make a deal with a major label, but Rick was insistent.
He didn't want to do it at first, and I said, I'll make the records, and I'll do all the work, and you be my partner.
And the more I got to know Rick, the more I felt that my efforts should go into the partnership and not into a separate company. Because I already had Run DMC and Houdini and Jimmy Spicer and Curtis Blow and the Fields Four. I was managing a lot of acts. I had a lot.
I knew that if he was involved, it was a real label, whereas if I was doing it myself, it was a kid in a college dorm.
So while he was still a student at NYU, Rubin borrowed $5,000 from his parents to start the Def Jam label with Russell Simmons. In late 1984, their first release was a 12-inch single of LL Cool J's I Need a Beat, and it sold 120,000 copies.
I need a beat.
Def Jam's next single was a Beastie Boys track called Rock Hard, which had massive crossover appeal and showed the label was on the right track.
We play guitar, not just B-boys, we're real rock stars.
These two records did well enough critically and commercially to have Columbia Records give him and his partner a 7-figure distribution deal for their Def Jam label. Rubin broke the news to his parents that he was going into the music business by sending them a photo of the first check he received under the Columbia agreement. It was his way of telling them they shouldn't think he was throwing his life away just because he was skipping law school. The amount of the check was a cool $600,000, and the rest is history. Def Jam became a symbol of adventure and independence in the music world, and Rick established himself as a producer whose name on a record was a virtual guarantee of quality. In a 1986 interview with The Village Voice, a then 23-year-old Rick Rubin said, quote, "Def Jam is a unique label in that we're in the music business, whereas all the other record companies are in the banking business. They loan money, you make a record, you pay it back with your sales, and they take a piece from then on. They look at it as selling something. It's really disgusting," end quote. From the very beginning of his career, Rick never focused on trying to make a hit. Instead, his goal is to make music that excites him and the artist.
We didn't make them thinking, oh, this is going to change the world, or I can't wait for everybody to hear it. It was more like, I know my friends will like this. And if 500 people hear it, that's amazing. If we can sell enough of these to get to make another one, we've succeeded.
By maintaining a sincere approach to the art, Rick incidentally changed the face of music forever. During his time at Def Jam, he produced seminal hip-hop albums like LL Cool J's Radio, Run DMC's Raising Hell, and Beastie Boys' Licensed to Ill. With the Beastie Boys, Rick combined his three favorite styles, punk, rap, and heavy metal, into one. And despite its offensive nature, it became the first rap LP to top the Billboard charts. Rubin also produced Slayer's 1986 album Rain and Blood, which is now considered one of the greatest heavy metal records ever. This album includes dark lyrics pertaining to death, insanity, and murder, and it was considered so outrageous that Columbia Records refused to release it, so they had to bring it to another label. At the time, Rick was quoted saying, "Who said rock and roll was supposed to be nice? Rock and roll is about going against the rules," end quote. In a few short years, Def Jam had become one of the most significant music labels in the world. But Rick and Russell were no longer getting along. They weren't aligned from a music or a business standpoint.
There was no real falling out. It was really, and I can remember going out to lunch with Russell and saying, I feel like we'd be better friends if we weren't partners. Do you want to leave the company? He's like, I don't want to leave. It's like, okay, I'll leave. It was like as simple as that.
A lot of people would have stayed at Def Jam in Rick's position because it was so profitable, but he's not too attached to things. He didn't find the partnership fun anymore, so in 1988, he left Def Jam and headed across the country to Los Angeles, where he started his next record label, Def American.
It's like Steve Wozniak leaving Steve Jobs. A lot of the people that create things, they're just attached to the creative process, just creating something. They're not attached to the thing itself. They're attached to just being able to create something. And like the narrator said, like when Rick Rubin wasn't having any more fun, it was time to go. And that's proper for any true creative, any true creator, they'll just go create something else. And that's what this Deaf American recordings. I remember Deaf American. I believe the Beastie Boys followed Rick Rubin to Deaf American. I remember that label. We thought it was a hip hop label. We didn't really understand at the time what Rick Rubin was really on. We didn't know that he was, spanning many genres of music, because he was such a pivotal hip hop producer. But yeah, that's about as far as I'm gonna go into that. And I just want to highlight some of his earlier production in hip hop and what he's known for. Minimalism. One of the key things that Rick Rubin is known for is the minimalism. Focus on sparse beats, loud scratching, and heavy percussion, rejecting the more orchestrated funk-based production of the time. Raw energy, inspired by his background in the New York punk scene, Rubin sought to capture the high energy, authentic feel of live DJ sets. The 808 sound, prominently used the TR-808. That's a classic drum machine. Y'all got a lot of, most of y'all producers nowadays have sound packs, but back then a lot of the sounds were on actual machines. You had to buy the machine to get the sound. So that's what the Roland TR-808 is. Drum machine to create booming, powerful beats. Less is more. This is the same approach that Energy Beats has to his production. Stripped. Less is more. Minimalism. If you guys out here, you producers, think of just something being straightforward and simple, this is a very, very, foundational hip hop approach to production. Stripped away unnecessary layers to keep the sound direct and impactful. It allows the artist to breathe. If you allow the artist to breathe, you got an impactful hip hop record. Okay, key early productions. T La Rock and Jazzy J, It's Yours. That was featured on this documentary that I just played. Considered the first official Def Jam release produced by Rubin and Jazzy J. I Need a Beat. Ooh, that was one of my favorites. I was 7 years old when that came out. The track that helped kickstart Def Jam and brought a harder, raw sound to radio. Yes, that was a big record for hip-hop in general. Raising Hell, co-produced by Rubin. This album brought rap to the mainstream, featuring a rock and rap fusion. Yes, that was very necessary. Like I said, rock and roll was the biggest genre of music. It was on MTV, radio. It was the biggest at the time. And so to piggyback on rock and roll at that time, it was paramount. Without that, hip hop would not be where it's at now. Then you got Beastie Boys. That was also in 1986. I remember 86. I was 9. That was a big year for hip hop. These Raising Hell and License to Ill were two of the biggest hip hop records to come out that year. It laid the foundation. It kind of made hip hop was legitimized that year, I would say. Musically, it was legitimized. Transformed the group from a punk band to a rap rock powerhouse, featuring heavy rock sampling. Yeah, the Beastie Boys, believe it or not, for all you white rappers and white producers out there, this is proof that hip hop, early stages of hip hop, it included everybody. So this is what hip hop, DNA is about. Everybody can be included in hip hop. This is why, to this day, hip hop is multicultural. So this is proof, though. This is written. Like, you can literally go back and see the impact that License to Ill, an all-white rap group, was the biggest rap group in 1986. Trust me, that was a very big record. LL Cool J, Radio. That was a huge record. And this is the youth, right? LL was a teenager. So you had the youth getting involved with LL and Beastie Boys. And Run DMC was a little older, but we all identify with that sound. A definitive album showcasing the minimalist boom bap style. Yes. True indeed. Yeah, man. This is just a little, homage to Rick Rubin. To me, like I said, one of the most impactful producers of all time, not just in hip hop, but in rock, in punk, in country. He spanned a lot. I think he might even done some R&B. I don't know, but man, like this guy, Rick Rubin. If you guys are not familiar with him, he is one of the best, and he's known now for like being like a guru. He meditates, and he's a person that a lot of prominent producers and artists are sent to, to be able to get out of the hustle and bustle of what the hip hop industry or the music industry represent. So he's one of those kind of guys. He can help save your life. He understands that music is life, and life is music, and that to me is what Rick Rubin represents. He's one of my senseis, someone that has inspired me from afar, from my childhood, and he continues to be someone to look up to. And hats off to one of the best producers ever, any genre, any generation, I would say. Shout out to Rick Rubin, man, and everybody that helped create those early, most impactful hip hop records. That's pretty much the foundation of hip hop to this day. So yeah, man, y'all do y'all research on Rick Rubin. I'm gonna add the link to that original documentary that I had in there, so y'all can watch that in full. And I'm out, man. This is Beats and Life, Producer Spotlight 1.
Energy made this one.
Yeah. Beats and Life. That's right. From the very beginning, the first sound is the beat of the heart. The sound of life is only right. Let the beat is the start. We embark on a life of making memories of sounds. In our mind, when we find, we can make it with bound. We experience, experiment until it's a passion. You find your sound eventually. Just master what you practice. The passion becomes more when you develop your repertoire. There's purpose in the making of these beats.